Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. One of my men is hurt. We just need to get out of the cold.
Well, get in here before you freeze to death. All of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All of you.
The night the blizzard swallowed Ashford Falls, Ohio, most people locked their doors and prayed no one would knock. Dorothy Freeman did the opposite. At 74 years old, she opened her front door to 5 men every warning in her life had taught her to fear. They stood on her porch like shadows cut out of the storm. Big men, white men, leather vests, frozen beards, tattoos crawling up their necks. Snow packed into their boots, their sleeves, their hair. One of them had blood running down his arm, dark and steady, dripping onto the porch boards her late husband had painted himself. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. Only the wind did. It screamed down Willow Lane and slammed against the side of Dorothy's little blue house hard enough to make the windows rattle. The power had been out for nearly an hour. The streetlights were dead. The whole block had disappeared into white darkness. The man in front tried to lift one hand, but his fingers would not fully open. "Mom," he said, voice cracked and low. "I'm sorry to bother you. One of my men is hurt. We got caught out there. We just need somewhere warm for a minute." Dorothy held the flashlight in one hand and the doorframe with the other. She saw the patch on his vest, saw the skull, saw the road dirt under the ice, saw the blood, saw the young one behind him shaking so badly his knees kept hitting each other. And she knew what folks would say. Don't open that door. Not at night. Not to men like that. Not when you live alone. Not when you are an old black woman in a town where people still pretend history is over just because the signs came down. Dorothy's thumb tightened around the flashlight. Behind her, the house was small and dim. One candle burned on the kitchen table. Another flickered beside Samuel's photograph on the mantel. Her dead husband smiled from behind the glass, wearing the same brown hunting coat she had laid across the couch just 2 hours earlier, though she could not explain why. Outside, the wounded young man made a sound he tried to hide. Not a cry, worse. A breath that had almost given up. Dorothy looked at him, and something in her face changed. The fear did not vanish. It simply moved aside for something older, something stronger. She opened the door wider. "Well, get in here before you freeze to death, all of you." The leader stared at her like he had not understood. Maybe because every other house had stayed dark. Maybe because 2 curtains had moved and disappeared. Maybe because men like him were used to being feared, but not used to being received. Dorothy stepped back. "I said come in. Don't make me stand here heating the whole county." That got them moving. One by one, the bikers crossed her threshold. Their boots thudded on the old linoleum. Snow fell in clumps. Water spread across the floor in shining puddles. The room filled fast with wet leather, cold air, and the heavy silence of men who had been too close to death to talk big. The youngest one stumbled. The leader caught him under the shoulder. "Easy, Caleb. I got you." Dorothy pointed toward the kitchen table. "Put him there. Not the couch. The table. I need to see that arm." A man with red hands and frost on his eyelashes looked at her. "Mom, we don't want to trouble you." Dorothy turned on him so sharply he closed his mouth. "You already troubled me when you bled on my porch. Now sit down and let me do what needs doing." No one laughed. No one argued. The leader removed his gloves with stiff fingers. His hands were enormous, rough, scarred across the knuckles. But when he helped Caleb into the chair, his touch was careful, almost gentle. Dorothy noticed that. She noticed everything. She noticed the way one man kept glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to change their mind and throw them back into the storm. She noticed the way another tried to hide his trembling hands under his arms. She noticed the leader standing instead of sitting, letting the others take the little space she had. She did not know his name yet. She did not know he was Mason Keller. She did not know his signature could move millions of dollars before lunch. She did not know powerful men in Columbus waited outside the boardrooms just to get 5 minutes of his time. That night, he was not powerful. He was frozen. He was exhausted. He was standing in the living room of a poor widow, who had every reason to protect herself, and no reason at all to save him. Dorothy walked to the bathroom cabinet and pulled out an old white first aid box. Samuel's box. The metal latch stuck like always. She hit it once with her palm and it popped open. Peroxide, gauze, tape, scissors, not enough, never enough. She looked at Caleb's sleeve, soaked red from elbow to wrist. Then she looked toward the hallway closet where her clean sheets were folded. Her mouth tightened. "All right, baby," she said softly, sitting across from him. "This is going to sting." Caleb blinked at her. Nobody had called him baby in a long time. The candle flame bent in the draft. The storm beat against the walls. And inside that little house at the end of Willow Lane, the night that would change an entire town had just begun. Dorothy pressed the soaked leather sleeve between her fingers and knew right away. The cut was worse than the young man wanted to admit. Caleb sat stiff at the kitchen table, jaw locked, face pale under the candlelight. He could not have been more than 27, maybe younger in the eyes. His beard was patchy. His lips had gone blue. Every few seconds, his shoulders jumped from the cold. "I'm fine," he muttered. Dorothy looked over the top of her glasses. "Son, if you were fine, you would not be bleeding through my good towel." The man beside him, Tyler, let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. Then he coughed hard into his fist. His fingers were white at the tips, not pale. White Dorothy saw it and filed it away, one problem at a time. Mason stood near the living room wall, too large for the small house, his shoulders nearly blocking the hallway. He watched Dorothy cut away the sleeve with Samuel's old sewing scissors. He noticed how steady her hands were. He noticed how she did not look away from blood. He had sat across tables from governors and union heads, and men who made threats with smiles on their faces. He knew courage when he saw it, and this old woman had it. The peroxide hit Caleb's wound, and he sucked air through his teeth. "Hold still," Dorothy said. "Sorry, Mom. Don't apologize for hurting. Just don't kick my table." She cleaned the gash slowly, carefully. The skin around it was torn from the fall, road rash scraped deep beneath the dirt and ice. It needed a doctor. Stitches, probably. But the roads were closed, the town was dark, and the nearest emergency room might as well have been on the moon. Dorothy reached for gauze. There was not enough. She opened the little metal box again, as if more would appear if she looked with faith. Nothing did. Just a half roll of tape, 2 packets of ointment, and 1 folded bandage yellowed at the edge. For the first time, Mason spoke from the wall. "Mom, we can use anything. A shirt, a rag. Don't ruin your things." Dorothy did not turn around. "Mr. Whoever you are, I have lived long enough to know the difference between a thing and a person." The room went quiet. Even the storm seemed to pause. Then Dorothy stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled down a clean white sheet. It was one of the good ones, the kind she saved for company that almost never came. She tore it straight down the middle. The sound cracked through the house. Caleb looked up. "Mom, no. Yes." That was all she said. She wrapped his arm tight, not too tight, then tied the cloth with a knot Samuel had taught her when they used to tie tomato vines in the backyard. Caleb watched her hands. Something broke open in his face, quick and private. "My grandmother used to do that," he whispered. Dorothy softened. "Then she must have had sense." Caleb smiled once, small, tired, almost gone before it arrived. In the living room, Owen Brooks stood near the window, rubbing his arms. He was a broad man with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, half hidden under ice crystals. He kept looking out through the plastic sheeting. Dorothy had taped over the glass. "Nobody else opened up," he said under his breath. Luke Harris, older, narrow-faced, with a gray mustache full of melted snow, answered without looking at him. "Can't blame them." Owen turned. "I can." Mason's voice cut through, low and firm. "No, you can't." Owen went still. Mason looked from one man to the next. His beard was wet. His face was red from cold. But his eyes were clear now. "Fear makes people small," he said. "Tonight we found someone who didn't let it." Dorothy pretended not to hear, but she heard every word. She moved to the stove. The soup pot sat there with what was supposed to be her dinner and tomorrow's lunch. Chicken broth, a few carrots, some rice, not much meat. She lifted the lid and let the steam touch her face. 5 men, 1 pot. She opened the pantry. half a bag of rice, 1 can of red beans, saltines, pickles she had canned last summer, a heel of bread wrapped in wax paper. That was it. She stood there a second longer than she meant to. Mason noticed. He noticed the empty shelf, the careful way the jars were lined up to make the pantry look fuller than it was. He noticed the paper taped to the inside of the cabinet door, a handwritten list of bills. Gas, electric, medical, roof. Dorothy took the beans down and shut the cabinet before anyone could see more. But Mason had already seen enough. He had seen hunger dressed as hospitality. He had seen poverty trying to keep its dignity. And he had seen a woman give from an almost empty hand. Dorothy poured water into the soup, added rice, added beans, stirred until the pot looked fuller than it was. The flame clicked blue beneath it. The little kitchen warmed by inches. Tyler's teeth chattered so hard the sound carried. Dorothy turned. "You! Boots off!" Tyler blinked. "Me? Unless there's another man in here turning blue." He obeyed slowly, embarrassed. His socks were soaked. His feet were pale and stiff. Dorothy's face changed again. Not panic. Focus. Mason took 1 step forward. "Frostbite? Beginning of it," Dorothy said. "Sit him by the heater now." Owen and Luke moved fast. No jokes, no pride. They guided Tyler to the kerosene heater in the corner. Dorothy knelt in front of him with a blanket around her shoulders. Her knees cracked when she lowered herself, but she did not stop. Mason saw that too. A 74-year-old widow on a cold floor, rubbing warmth back into the feet of a stranger the world would cross the street to avoid. He looked toward the mantel. Samuel Freeman smiled from his photograph. And Mason Keller, a man worth more money than most towns would ever see, felt smaller than he had felt in years. The soup took longer than Dorothy wanted, and not long enough for the men to stop shaking. She stirred it with a wooden spoon worn smooth at the handle, the one Samuel used to tease her about. "Too much stirring, Dot," he used to say. "You trying to cook that soup or talk it into behaving?" She could almost hear him now. The thought hit her hard enough that she had to blink twice and look down into the pot. Behind her, Mason had finally taken Samuel's coat. Dorothy had pulled it from the couch without ceremony and pushed it against his chest. "Put this on." He looked at the brown canvas, then at the photograph on the mantel. "Mom, I can't take your husband's coat." "You're not taking it. You're wearing it." He swallowed. His hands closed around the fabric. For a moment, the room watched him without meaning to. The coat was old, heavy, wool-lined, patched at one elbow. It still carried the faint smell of cedar, kerosene, and the man who had worn it through 30 winters. Mason slipped his arms into it. It fit, not perfectly, but close enough to make Dorothy go still. She turned back to the stove before anyone could see her face. Luke noticed. He lowered his eyes. Owen stopped rubbing his hands. Even Caleb, half bent over his bandaged arm, understood something sacred had just been handed across that room. Mason did too. "Thank you, Mrs. Freeman," he said. Dorothy did not correct him for using the formal name. She only nodded once. "Soup's almost ready." The men ate standing, sitting, leaning wherever they could fit. Dorothy served Caleb first because he was hurt. Then Tyler, because his feet still frightened her. Then Luke, Owen, and finally Mason, who tried to refuse until she gave him a look sharp enough to cut rope. "Don't start being noble in my kitchen." "Yes, Mom." He took the bowl. The soup was thin. Everyone knew it. Rice floated between beans and small pieces of chicken like survivors after a flood. But the steam curled into their faces, and the salt hit their tongues, and something in their bodies came back from the edge. Owen held his bowl with both hands. "My God," he whispered. "That's the best thing I ever tasted," Dorothy snorted. "Then you've been eating wrong." A quiet smile passed through the room. Not laughter. Not yet. Just the first sign that life had not let go of them. Tyler sat near the heater with Dorothy's wool socks on his feet. Her good socks. Dark green. Mended twice at the heel. He looked down at them, ashamed. "Mom, I'll wash these and mail them back." Dorothy handed him another cracker. "Baby, you better just keep your toes. We'll worry about socks later." That was when Tyler covered his mouth. He tried to hide it, but his eyes filled fast. He turned toward the wall. Big man. Thick shoulders. Tattoo on his forearm. Crying over socks. Nobody teased him. Not one man. Mason looked away, giving him that dignity. Dorothy moved slower now, letting the moment breathe. She knew something about men and pride. Samuel had carried pain in his back for years and called it stiffness. Her father had called hunger a light supper. Men hid suffering in strange places, so she let Tyler have his. Outside, the storm pushed harder. Ice snapped in the trees. Somewhere down the block, a transformer popped with a blue flash that lit the windows for half a second. Caleb flinched. Luke crossed himself without thinking. Owen muttered a curse, then apologized to Dorothy. "Sorry, Mom." "If the Lord made this weather," Dorothy said, "I expect he's heard's worse tonight." That time, Luke laughed. A real one, short, surprised, grateful. Dorothy set her empty coffee cup in the sink. Mason saw it. Empty cup, no bowl, no plate, no spoon. He looked at the stove. There was no soup left, Mrs. Freeman. She knew his tone before she turned. "What? You didn't eat? Had a big lunch?" "No, you didn't." The room went still again. Dorothy faced him slowly. The candlelight caught the lines around her eyes. Not anger. Warning. Mason understood he had crossed something. He lowered his voice. "I'm sorry." Dorothy held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she picked up the pot and carried it to the sink. "You boys needed it more." That sentence landed harder than any speech could have. Mason had built companies from failing warehouses. He had sat through strikes, lawsuits, hostile bids, funerals, and board meetings where men smiled while reaching for knives. He knew numbers. He knew leverage. He knew power. But he did not know what to do with a woman who had nothing, and still gave as if she were rich. He looked around the room again. The ceiling stain above the hallway. The buckets lined up beneath it. The plastic over the windows, peeling at the tape. The kerosene heater, doing the work of a furnace that was silent. The medical bill tucked halfway under a stack of church bulletins on the side table. Dorothy followed his eyes, her face closed. It was quick, but he saw it. Poverty has a sound when it is noticed by strangers. It sounds like a drawer shutting, like a curtain being pulled, like a proud person standing straighter than they should have to. Mason looked down. He would remember that. At midnight, the men settled wherever there was floor. Owen near the door, Luke beneath the front window, Tyler by the heater, Caleb on two kitchen chairs pushed together, his bandaged arm resting on a folded towel. Mason remained awake. So did Dorothy. She sat at the table, one hand around her cold coffee cup, listening to the wind and the breathing of 5 strangers. After a long silence, Mason spoke softly. "Why did you open the door?" Dorothy looked at Samuel's picture. "Because somebody knocked. Because somebody knocked." Mason said nothing after that. He simply sat there in Samuel Freeman's coat, elbows resting on his knees, listening to the storm beat against the walls. The candle beside Samuel's picture had burned low. Shadows moved across the room. 5 large men lay scattered around the little house, sleeping in strange positions, boots lined by the door like obedient schoolboys. The wind howled. The heater clicked. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, Caleb whimpered in his sleep. Mama Dorothy looked up immediately. The young man was sweating now. His bandaged arm lay across his chest, his face twisted with pain. Mason was beside him before the sound finished leaving his mouth. "Easy, son." Caleb blinked awake. "Sorry, nothing to apologize for." The young man swallowed hard. "I hate hospitals." Dorothy stood and came over. "You hate dying more." That got a weak smile out of him. Luke chuckled from beneath his blanket. "She got you there, kid." For a few minutes, nobody spoke. Then Owen shifted against the wall. "I got a girl back home," he said quietly. Nobody answered. They just listened. "She's 17, senior year. Wants to study nursing. Been saving money since she was 13. He rubbed his eyes roughly. "She called before we lost signal. Told me to drive safe. I snapped at her because I was running late." His voice cracked. "Didn't even tell her I loved her." Tyler looked over from the heater. "Call her tomorrow." "Damn right you will," Luke added. Owen nodded, staring at the floor. Dorothy listened while folding another blanket. "Life's too short to save kindness for later, baby." That sentence stayed in the room. Even Mason felt it. He thought of his own daughter in Columbus. 40 years old now, a lawyer, busy, strong, independent. He loved her more than breath itself, but there had been months when he forgot to say it. Months. Money made schedules. Schedules made distance. Distance made excuses. and excuses had a way of stealing years. At 2 in the morning, the house grew colder. The kerosene heater struggled. Dorothy noticed it first. The flame had weakened. She frowned. Mason saw it. Problem? Need more fuel. You got some? Enough till morning. That answer wasn't true. Mason heard the hesitation. So did Luke. Nobody said anything. Pride was a funny thing. People who had little protected it hardest. Dorothy wrapped another quilt around Tyler and sat down again. 20 minutes later, she quietly stood and moved toward the kitchen. Mason watched her. She thought nobody saw. But he did. She opened a cabinet, took out flour, sugar, buttermilk. Not much. Very little. She measured carefully, slowly. Luke raised his head. Mrs. Freeman? She nearly jumped. Go back to sleep. What are you doing? Making breakfast. Ma'am, it's 2 in the morning. Then breakfast is early. Tyler laughed softly. Caleb stared. Owen sat up. Mason just watched. The old woman moved around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had spent 50 years feeding people. The spoon scraped the bowl. Flour dust floated through the candlelight. The smell came first, warm, simple, home. Caleb closed his eyes. Smells like Grandma's house. Dorothy smiled without turning. Good grandmas know biscuits solve most things. Luke laughed. Amen. Mason stood. Need help? No, I insist. She looked over her shoulder. Can you wash your hands? He blinked. Excuse me? Can you wash your hands? You men been dragging Harleys through snow and Lord knows what else. For the first time in hours, all 5 men laughed. Real laughter. Deep laughter. The kind that loosened fear. Mason smiled. Yes, ma'am. He walked to the sink, rolled up Samuel's sleeves, and washed his hands. Nobody in that room knew that 4,000 employees answered to him. Nobody knew men in expensive suits waited outside conference rooms hoping for 10 minutes of his attention. Nobody knew newspapers called him one of the toughest businessmen in Ohio. Tonight, none of that mattered, because Dorothy Freeman had given him a job. Wash your hands. And Mason Keller obeyed without hesitation. At 3 in the morning, fresh biscuits sat beneath a clean towel. Dorothy covered them carefully. There, morning. She looked around the room, 5 sleeping men, blankets everywhere, wet boots drying by the door, Samuel's coat resting on Mason's shoulders, the photograph smiling from the mantel. Dorothy sat down again and wrapped a quilt around herself. The storm had taken the lights. It had taken the roads. It had nearly taken 5 lives. But somehow, inside that tiny house on Willow Lane, it had brought 6 lonely souls together. And none of them knew that when the sun came up, everything was about to change. Morning came quiet, like the storm had finally run out of anger. A thin gold light pushed through the plastic-covered windows. Snow sat high against the porch steps. The street beyond the glass was buried, smooth and white, with no tire tracks, no footprints, no sound except the soft ticking of the heater and the slow breathing of men waking up one by one. Caleb opened his eyes first. For a moment, he looked confused. Then he saw the ceiling stain, the candle on the mantel, the quilt over his legs, and Dorothy Freeman standing at the stove with her back to him. Coffee. He smelled coffee, real coffee, not gas station coffee, not burned road coffee from a paper cup. Fresh, dark, hot coffee. He tried to sit up and winced. Dorothy heard it without turning. Don't start acting tough before breakfast. Caleb froze. Yes, Mom. Mason woke in the recliner, still wearing Samuel's coat. His neck was stiff. His boots were dry beside the door. Someone had placed them neatly on newspaper. Dorothy, of course. Even after everything, she had protected her floor. He sat forwards, slowly, and looked around. Owen was asleep near the wall with one arm over his face. Luke had his mouth open under a flowered quilt. Tyler sat up by the heater, touching his toes like he was making sure they still belonged to him. They had survived. That fact hit Mason harder than he expected. Not because of training, not because of money, not because of machines or planning or rank. Because an old woman with a failing furnace opened a door. Dorothy set a plate of biscuits on the kitchen table, warm, split open, a jar of strawberry preserves beside them. The preserves were homemade, with a little handwritten label on the lid. Summer batch. Mason looked at the plate. Mrs. Freeman, you didn't have to do that. Dorothy poured coffee into mismatched mugs. I know, that was all. The men gathered around the table like boys called in from the cold. Too big for the chairs. knees bumping cabinets, elbows tucked in, voices low. Polite now in a way that was almost painful. Owen took one biscuit, then stopped. "Are you eating first, Mom?" Dorothy pointed at him with the butter knife. "You let a 74-year-old woman run her own kitchen." He nodded quickly. "Yes, Mom, they ate." For a few minutes there were no words, only small sounds. A chair creaking, a spoon tapping a mug, a man exhaling after the first hot bite. Tyler closed his eyes when the biscuit hit his mouth. "Lord have mercy." Luke looked at him. "You praying or reviewing?" "Both." Dorothy smiled at the stove. Caleb ate with his left hand, awkward but determined. Crumbs fell onto his bandage. He brushed them away like evidence. When Dorothy saw him struggling with the jam, she took the knife from him and spread it herself. He looked down. "Thank you." "You call your mother when you get somewhere with a phone." Caleb's face changed. "I will. No, you'll promise." He swallowed. "I promise." Mason watched that exchange and felt something tighten in his chest. Dorothy did not just feed people. She pulled them back into their lives, back to the people waiting for them, back to promises they had almost lost the chance to keep. After breakfast, Mason stood. The chair legs scraped softly. The room felt different now. Morning made everything visible. The water stain on the ceiling, the cracked paint near the windows, the medical bill half hidden beneath church bulletins, the empty flour bag folded flat on the counter. He reached inside his vest, now dry from the heat, and pulled out a folded stack of cash. Hundreds. He had taken it from the emergency roll he kept on rides. There was more than enough there to cover the food, the sheets, the fuel, the kindness, if kindness could be priced. He placed it on the table. "Mrs. Freeman, please take this." Dorothy looked at the money. No one moved. Owen lowered his mug. Luke stared at the floor. Caleb looked between Mason and Dorothy, sensing trouble before he understood it. Dorothy picked up the stack. For 1 second, Mason thought she might accept. Then she pushed it back across the table with 2 fingers. "Put that away. Mom, put that away." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Mason looked at her. "You gave us food you didn't have. I gave you what you needed. You tore up your sheets. Sheets can be replaced. You stayed awake all night. So did a lot of mothers before me." His eyes shone, but his voice stayed even. "I'm trying to thank you." Dorothy leaned both hands on the table. "Then thank me by getting that boy to a doctor, calling your families, and remembering that next time somebody knocks, they might not look like what you expected." Silence. That was the whole sermon. No church, no pulpit. Just a kitchen table, cold coffee, and a truth nobody could escape. Mason slowly picked up the money. "Yes, Mom." Then he reached into another pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook. Dark brown. Gold-edged pages. Out of place against the biker vest. Out of place in that kitchen. Dorothy noticed. So did Luke. Mason opened it. "May I have your full name?" Dorothy narrowed her eyes. "For what? A proper thank you. I already told you I don't need money." "I heard you. Then why you writing?" "Because I listen better with a pen in my hand." Dorothy almost smiled despite herself. "Dorothy Mae Freeman." Mason wrote it carefully. "Address? You standing in it." He waited. She sighed and gave it to him. "When the road's clear," she said, "you better not send me some fancy fruit basket. I don't trust pears in gold paper." Owen coughed into his mug to hide a laugh. Mason closed the notebook. No gold pears. Outside, the sun broke over Willow Lane, bright on the snow. And Mason Keller already knew he was not done with Dorothy Freeman. Before they left, Dorothy made them clean up the floor. Not because she was unkind, because she was Dorothy Freeman. Owen found an old mop in the pantry and pushed it across the linoleum with the careful seriousness of a man defusing a bomb. Luke wiped the table. Tyler folded the blankets, badly at first, until Dorothy took one look and made him do them again. "Corners match," she said. Tyler looked at the crooked quilt in his hands. "Mom, I rebuild transmissions for a living. I don't fold quilts." "Then today you learned something useful." Caleb laughed, then winced and held his arm. Dorothy pointed at him without even turning. "Don't tear that bandage showing off your teeth." "Yes, Mom." Mason stood by the front door, watching his men become quieter, gentler versions of themselves inside that little house. Men who had frightened people by their size were now asking where to put coffee mugs. Men who had been turned away in a storm were taking care not to scratch an old woman's floor. That mattered. He had spent a lifetime around power, real power, money, contracts, political favors, access. He knew the way people changed when they wanted something from him. But Dorothy did not want anything. That made her impossible to manage, and unforgettable. The snow on the porch was waist-high in places. The road beyond Willow Lane had not been plowed. Still, the sky was clear now, the kind of hard winter blue that made everything look sharper than it felt. Mason stepped outside first. The cold slapped him awake. He turned back. "Boys, shovel the steps." Owen looked at the buried walkway. "With what?" Dorothy answered from behind them. "There's a shovel by the side door unless somebody stole that too." Luke grabbed it. Owen found a flat garden spade. Together they cleared the porch and the first stretch of walk. Tyler salted with rock salt from a plastic bucket near the railing. Caleb stood useless and irritated until Dorothy made him hold the door open. "I can help," he said. "You can heal." That shut him up. While the others worked, Mason walked slowly around the front of the house. He did not look like a CEO. Not in Samuel's coat, with his beard still damp and his boots scuffed white from salt. But his eyes were working. Roofline sagging over the east corner. Gutter pulled loose. Window seals failing. Front rail unstable. He did not take pictures. Not yet. That would have felt wrong, but his mind made notes the way it always had. Costs. Crews. Permits. Timing. Quietly. Carefully. When he came back to the porch, Dorothy was standing in the doorway with Caleb beside her. The boy looked younger in daylight. Tired. Grateful. Ashamed of needing help. All the things young men rarely know how to carry. Mason held out Samuel's coat. Dorothy did not take it at first. "Keep it till you get to wherever you're going," she said. "No, Mom." The wind moved between them. Mason folded the coat over his arm and stepped closer. "This belongs here." Dorothy looked at the coat, then at the photo visible through the doorway behind her. Her throat moved once. She reached out. "Thank you." "No," Mason said softly. "Thank you." Caleb shifted forward. His good hand came up awkwardly. "Mrs. Freeman?" Dorothy looked at him. He tried to say something, but the words caught. He stared down at the bandage made from her sheet. White cloth. Tight knot. A stranger's kindness wrapped around his arm. "You remind me of my grandma," he said finally. Dorothy's face softened. "Then you better call your mama and your grandma, if she's still here to answer." Caleb nodded fast. "I will. Today?" "Yes, Mum. Today." Owen came up next, rubbing his hands together. "I owe you socks." Dorothy narrowed her eyes. "You owe me better circulation." He smiled, then reached into his vest. Dorothy's hand snapped up. "Don't you start." Owen froze. "I was just getting a card." She kept watching him. He pulled out a worn business card and placed it on the porch rail instead of handing it to her. "If you ever need a mechanic. Or anything with an engine. No charge." Dorothy looked at the card. Owen Brooks, Brooks Motor Works, Syracuse, New York. She picked it up. "I don't own anything with an engine except an old lawnmower that hates me." "Then I already hate it back." That made her smile. Luke shook her hand with both of his. "Thank you for seeing men and not trouble." Dorothy held his gaze. "Try giving other people the same courtesy." Luke nodded once, serious, humbled. Then Mason turned to his men. "We move." There was no drama in the words, just command. They stepped off the porch one by one and into the snow. 5 black figures against a white street. Slower now, but alive. At the corner, Mason looked back. Dorothy stood in the doorway, small under the patched porch roof. Samuel's coat folded over one arm. She lifted her hand. Mason lifted his. Then they disappeared beyond the curve of Willow Lane. Dorothy watched until the last dark shape was gone. Only then did she close the door. The house fell quiet. Too quiet. She stood in the entryway a moment, listening to the heater click and the water drip from the ceiling into the bucket in the hall. Plink, 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 plink. She carried Samuel's coat to the couch, smoothed the sleeves, and set it exactly where it had been the day before. Then she sat at the kitchen table. The biscuit plate was empty. The coffee pot was empty. The flour bag was empty. The house smelled of wet leather and wood smoke and something she could not name. Maybe mercy. Dorothy wrapped both hands around her mug, though there was nothing left in it. "Well, Samuel," she whispered, "you should have seen those boys. For 2 weeks, nothing happened." The roof still leaked. The heater still coughed. The medical bill stayed in the drawer. And Dorothy Freeman believed the strange night had ended. She was wrong. The first thing that arrived was not a thank you card. It was a delivery truck. Dorothy heard it before she saw it. A deep engine rumbling at the curb, too heavy for Willow Lane, too clean for that broken little street. She was in the kitchen pressing tape back over the plastic on the window when the sound rolled through the house. She froze. Then she peered through the cloudy sheet. A man in a brown jacket climbed out of the truck and carried 2 sealed containers up her walkway. Kerosene. Good kerosene. The kind she had stopped buying because the cheaper kind lasted longer if she kept the heater low and wore an extra sweater. He knocked once. Dorothy opened the door with the chain still on. "Can I help you?" "Delivery for Dorothy Freeman." "I didn't order anything." The man checked his clipboard. "Already paid for, Mom." "Exact address. Willow Lane, Ashford Falls. Paid by who?" He looked again. "Doesn't say. Just says customer request. Leave at front door." Dorothy stared at him. "This some church thing?" He gave a small shrug. "I just drive the truck, Mom." He set the containers down gently, wished her a good day, and left before she could argue with him. Dorothy stood there with cold air pushing around her ankles, looking at the fuel like it might speak. Across the street, Mrs. Helen Parker lifted her blinds 2 inches. Dorothy saw the movement. Of course she did. By supper time, half the block knew Dorothy had gotten a mystery delivery. Helen Parker told her niece. Her niece told Patrice Bell, who lived 3 doors down and considered herself the unofficial newspaper of Willow Lane. Patrice knocked just after 6, wrapped in a purple coat, eyes bright. "Dorothy May, who is sending you fuel?" Dorothy let her in because Patrice would have stood there until spring. "Nobody is sending me anything. It was probably a mistake." "A mistake with your full name on it?" Patrice looked toward the 2 containers by the heater. "That is a mighty specific mistake." Dorothy poured her tea. "Don't start. I'm not starting. I'm observing. You observe too much." Patrice smiled. "That's why I know things." Dorothy shook her head, but she smiled too. Only a little. For the first time in days, the house felt warm enough that she did not need the quilt over her shoulders. That should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her. Help was easier to give than to receive. Giving let a person stand tall. Receiving made you feel watched. The next morning, she called the hardware store from her landline. Mr. Collins answered. "Collins Hardware. This is Dorothy Freeman. Somebody sent fuel to my house." "Yes, Mom. Who paid for it?" "Customer asked not to leave a name. I'm asking you to leave one." "Can't do that, Miss Dorothy." She heard the smile in his voice. "Eddie Collins, I knew you when you were wearing diapers at Vacation Bible School." "Yes, Mom, and my mama still scares me more than you do. But I still can't give a customer name." Dorothy pressed her lips together. "Was it a man?" "Couldn't say." "Was it one of those bikers?" Long pause. "Miss Dorothy, you have a good warm day now." He hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand. Bikers. A week later, the second thing arrived. This time, it was a white pickup with the logo of Reeves Roofing on the door. 2 men stepped out wearing work boots, tool belts, and the careful expressions of contractors who know they are about to ask an old woman for trust. Dorothy met them on the porch before they could knock. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." The older one removed his cap. "Morning, Mom. We're not selling. We were asked to do an inspection." "Asked by who?" He looked at his work order. "Keller Meridian Group." Dorothy blinked. Never heard of them. Neither had he, judging by his face. "Says here, no charge to homeowner. Full assessment. Roof gutters, flashing attic moisture. No charge is how folks get charged later." The younger worker, a soft-faced man named Ben, shifted his weight. "Mom, my grandma would say the same thing." "Good. Then your grandma has sense." He smiled. "She does." Dorothy wanted to send them away. Every part of her pride stood in the doorway with arms crossed. But that morning, a brown stain had spread another inch across the hallway ceiling. The bucket in the attic was nearly full again. She had woken before dawn to the sound of water dripping into plastic. Plink, plink, plink. Pride did not stop leaks. She stepped aside. "You can look. You cannot tear up anything. You cannot put my name on anything. And if one of you falls through that roof, I do not have insurance good enough to explain it. The older man nodded. Fair enough. They climbed up with ladders and flashlights. They took photos. They measured the sag over the east corner. They checked the attic and came back down quieter than they had gone up. Dorothy noticed. Bad? The older man glanced at Ben, then back at her. Needs attention soon. That means bad. It means we'll submit the report today, to Keller Meridian. Yes, Mom. After they left, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table and pulled the old magazine from under the wobbly leg. The table tilted without it. She had used that magazine for months. America's most unconventional CEOs. Faces lined the cover. Men and women in suits, some smiling, some trying not to. Her eyes moved across the photos, then stopped. Silver beard, broad shoulders, same eyes. Not in leather now. Not frozen. Not asking for shelter. Mason Keller stared back from the cover, in a charcoal suit, arms folded, standing in front of a glass tower. Dorothy's breath caught. Well, I'll be, she whispered. The man who had slept in Samuel's coat was not just a biker. And whatever was coming next, Dorothy suddenly knew one thing for certain. It was not a mistake. 3 weeks after the blizzard, the black SUV came down Willow Lane, like it had taken a wrong turn out of another world. Dorothy saw it from the kitchen sink. She was rinsing a chipped coffee mug, watching the thin stream of water run brown for 2 seconds before it cleared. The pipes had been doing that lately. She told herself not to worry. She had a long list of things not to worry about. Then the engine rolled in, low, smooth, expensive. She looked through the plastic-covered window. A black Cadillac Escalade stopped in front of her house. Clean chrome, tinted windows, tires tall enough to climb over the snowbanks still piled along the curb. Nothing on Willow Lane looked like that. Not even close. Across the street, Helen Parker's curtains snapped open. 2 doors down, Patrice Bell stepped onto her porch in house shoes and a red robe. Dorothy dried her hands slowly. "Oh, Lord," she murmured. "What now?" The driver's door opened first. A man in a dark suit stepped out and scanned the street. Not threatening, professional. Like he knew how to notice exits without moving his head too much. Then the rear passenger door opened. Mason Keller stepped out. But not the Mason who had stood half-frozen on her porch. This man wore a charcoal overcoat cut clean across the shoulders. No leather vest, no ice in his beard, no boots caked with snow. His silver beard was trimmed. His hair was combed back. Polished black shoes touched the slush at the curb like they did not belong there and knew it. Dorothy did not move. For one long second, she saw both men at once. The biker wrapped in Samuel's coat, the CEO from the magazine, the stranger who had asked for warmth, the powerful man whose company name was now showing up on work orders and delivery slips. Mason walked up the shoveled path, slowly, alone. The suited driver stayed by the SUV. Dorothy opened the door before he knocked. He stopped with one hand lifted. Mrs. Freeman. Dorothy leaned against the door frame. "Well, I'll be. You clean up different." A smile broke across his face. Not the boardroom kind, a real one. "Yes, Mom, I've heard that before." She looked past him at the SUV. "You bring the government with you?" "No, Mom." "A bank?" "No, Mom. Somebody here to put a lien on my house?" His smile faded into something gentler. "Never." She studied him. The cold air moved between them. Down the block, Patrice pretended to check her mailbox. Dorothy saw that too. "You planning to stand there and give my neighbors a whole movie?" Mason glanced toward Patrice. "I was hoping I could come in." Dorothy hesitated. Not because she feared him now, because receiving kindness still felt more dangerous than giving it. Finally, she stepped back. "Wipe your feet. Rich shoes still track mud." "Yes, Mom." He wiped them carefully. Inside, the house seemed smaller with him in it this way. The overcoat, the quiet confidence, the leather folder under one arm, the kind of folder people carried into rooms where signatures changed lives. Mason removed his coat without being asked. Dorothy noticed. He hung it on the back of a chair, not the clean one, the old one by the wall. She noticed that too. "Coffee?" she asked. "If it's not trouble, everything is trouble. Coffee just tastes better." She poured 2 mugs. He sat at the same kitchen table where he had eaten biscuits. The magazine was no longer under the wobbly leg. Dorothy had placed a folded piece of cardboard there instead. The table rocked anyway. Mason saw the magazine on the counter. His face was on it. Dorothy followed his eyes. I had you under my table for 6 months. He blinked, then he laughed. It came out big and surprised, filling the kitchen. Dorothy laughed too, just once. Then she caught herself, shook her head, and set his coffee down. Don't get proud. You weren't doing much, just keeping things level. Mason wiped one eye. Fair enough. For a moment, the tension loosened. Then he opened the leather folder. The room changed. Dorothy felt it before he spoke. Mrs. Freeman, I need to tell you who I am properly. I know who you are. Mason Keller, big CEO. Keller Meridian Group. People write articles about you wearing expensive coats and pretending not to like cameras. He nodded once. That's part of it. Part? He placed both hands around the mug but did not drink. I started Keller Meridian with one used truck and a warehouse lease I almost couldn't pay. Now we run freight, rail support, warehouse systems, and infrastructure contracts across several states. We employ a little over 4,000 people. Dorothy said nothing. Mason looked around the kitchen, at the ceiling stain, the kerosene heater, the plastic windows, Samuel's photograph on the mantel. But that night, none of that meant anything. My company didn't keep me warm. My money didn't stop Caleb from bleeding. My title didn't make one door open. His voice lowered. You did. Dorothy's fingers tightened around her mug. I told you already. I didn't do it for money. I know. I don't want charity. I know that too. Then why are you here? Mason leaned forward. Because what you did was not charity. It was leadership. Dorothy stared at him. Outside, the neighborhood was still watching. Inside, the old heater clicked once, weak and tired. Mason opened the folder and turned it toward her. I'm not here to pay you back, Mrs. Freeman. I'm here to invest in what you have been doing your whole life. Dorothy looked down at the first page. Her name was printed at the top. Dorothy Mae Freeman Community Renewal Proposal. Her breath caught. Mason watched her face carefully, and the little kitchen went completely still. Dorothy did not touch the folder at first. Her name sat there in black ink, clean and official, like it had wandered into the wrong house. Dorothy Mae Freeman Community Renewal Proposal. She read it once, then again. The words did not change. Mason waited. He had learned long ago that silence could do more than pressure ever could. In business, men rushed to fill silence because they were afraid of what it might reveal. Dorothy did not rush. She sat with the words. She measured them. She looked for traps. Finally, she lifted her eyes. Who wrote this? I did. You personally, with help from my foundation team. Foundation team. She said the words like they were a new kind of weather. Mason nodded. Keller Meridian has a charitable foundation. Most years, we fund shelters, food banks, apprenticeship programs. Good work, useful work. But I'll be honest with you. A lot of it has been from a distance. Checks, reports, photos at ribbon cuttings. Dorothy leaned back. And now you're tired of smiling by giant scissors? A small smile touched his face. Something like that. He turned the first page. Let me walk through this. Please hear the whole thing before you decide anything. Dorothy folded her hands on the table. I make no promises about keeping quiet. I would not expect you to. That pleased her, though she did not show it. Mason pointed to the first section. Your house comes first. Dorothy's face closed immediately. No, you haven't heard it. I heard enough. Mrs. Freeman. Don't Mrs. Freeman me. I am not losing this house to some paperwork I can't read without a lawyer. Mason stayed still. It is not a concern. It is his experience. He nodded slowly. Then let's start there. No lien, no loan, no ownership transfer, no repayment clause. No reverse mortgage, no tax scheme, nothing attached to your deed. You keep your house, fully, legally, completely. Dorothy stared at him. He slid a page forward. I had our counsel draft it in plain language first. Then we'll provide an independent attorney of your choosing to review it. Paid by us, but representing you only. If you don't like one sentence, we stop. Dorothy looked down. For the first time, she touched the paper. Her fingertips moved over the words like they might burn. Mason continued. New roof, new gutters, furnace replacement, electrical safety upgrade, plumbing inspection, insulation. Windows, everything necessary to make this home safe and warm. Dorothy's jaw tightened. And the porch? Mason looked toward the back of the house. Samuel's porch stays. Her eyes snapped to him. He built that. I know. You don't know. No, I don't. But I know what it means because you looked at it before you opened the door to me. Dorothy's lips parted, then closed. Mason's voice softened. We repair around it. We don't erase him. That was the first crack. Not in the house. In her guard. She looked away towards Samuel's photograph. The room slowed. The heater clicked. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing over wet slush. Mason turned another page, second. The old Gray Line hardware building on Mercer Street. Dorothy frowned. That place has been empty for years. 3 years and 8 months, Mason said. Tax delinquent. Roof intact. Good bones. Bad windows. Keller Meridian Foundation is prepared to purchase it and convert it into a community kitchen. Dorothy looked back. A what? A kitchen. Meals 5 days a week, hot lunch, after-school supper, coffee in the mornings for seniors, emergency warming center during winter storms. Her hands went still. Mason watched the idea reach her slowly. Not as charity tossed from above, as work she already understood. You feed people, he said. You've fed us from almost nothing. Your neighbors know it. Those children down the street know it. I've spoken to Patrice Bell. Dorothy's eyes narrowed. You spoke to Patrice? She spoke to me for 47 minutes. Dorothy shook her head. That woman needs a timer. Mason almost smiled. She said you leave plates on porches, watch kids, organize cleanups. She said people come to you before they go to the cities because the city usually doesn't answer. Dorothy looked at the table. People exaggerate. Not that much. He turned the page. I want you to run it. Dorothy froze. Run what? The community kitchen. Me? You. I'm 74. You're experienced. I worked in a school cafeteria for nearly 30 years, feeding hundreds of children a day on a budget no boardroom's executive could survive. That hit harder than praise. Because it was true. Mason tapped the paper, paid position, full benefits, staff of 5 hired locally, transportation support, training if you want it. No internet experience required. We'll give you someone for the computer work. You make the rules for the kitchen culture. Dorothy stared. Kitchen culture? Who gets welcomed? How people are treated? What dignity looks like when a person comes in hungry? She swallowed. Her voice came smaller. And who pays for the food? Foundation covers the first 3 years. After that, we build partnerships. Churches, farms, grocery suppliers, local grants, sustainable, not flashy, real. Dorothy blinked hard once. Mason turned the last page but did not speak right away. This part was heavier. Third, Willow Lane itself. He looked toward the window, where the plastic had peeled again at the corner. Sidewalk repairs, street lighting, snow emergency check system for seniors, a small playground at the vacant lot by the curve. Dorothy's hand went to her mouth. Mason's voice stayed steady. A community board manages it. Residents only. I'd like you to chair it. Dorothy whispered. Those children would have a place to play? Yes, Mom. Not in the street? Not in the street. The crack became a break. Dorothy looked at Samuel's picture. Then Mason said the final thing. And 2 annual scholarships for Ashford Falls High seniors who show service to this town. Not perfect grades, not rich parents. Service. He paused. The Samuel and Dorothy Freeman scholarships. Dorothy went completely still. No breath, no sound. Then one tear slid down her cheek. Mason did not hand her a tissue. He did not speak over it. He just sat there and let a woman who had held up the world in silence finally be seen. Dorothy signed nothing that day. That was the first thing Mason respected. She called a legal aid office in Columbus. She asked questions. She made Mason wait. She made his lawyers rewrite 2 paragraphs in plain English because, as she put it, words should not need a ladder to climb over. Mason agreed to every change. And when the final papers were signed, Dorothy Freeman did not lose her home. She took her name back. By spring, Willow Lane no longer looked forgotten. Crews repaired the sidewalks. New streetlights rose along the south end. The vacant lot at the curve became a small playground with swings, benches, and soft rubber ground where children could fall without bleeding. Helen Parker stood at her window every day pretending not to watch. Patrice Bell watched openly and gave instructions nobody had asked for. The biggest change came on Mercer Street. The old Gray Line hardware building opened as the Samuel and Dorothy Freeman Community Kitchen. Fresh paint, warm lights, tables for families, coffee for seniors. A commercial stove Dorothy called too fancy until she learned every burner by sound. On opening morning, people lined up before the doors unlocked. Single mothers, retired steelworkers, teenagers who had nowhere warm to go after school, men who still wore work boots even after the factories closed. Dorothy stood in the doorway wearing a white apron, hands folded, eyes shining. Mason stood off to the side in a plain jacket, not a suit. He wanted the day to belong to her. But the truth came out anyway. A local reporter stepped forward with a camera crew. "Mrs. Freeman, is it true this entire project started because you opened your door to a group of stranded bikers?" Dorothy looked at Mason, then at the line of people waiting behind the camera. "It started because they were cold," she said. "That is all." The reporter blinked, wanting more drama. Dorothy gave her none. "People don't need to earn warmth, baby. They just need to be cold." That sentence aired that night across Ohio. Then it spread, not because it was polished, because it was true. Keller Meridian's board noticed too. Some donors wanted their names on plaques. Some executives wanted cameras at every meal. Mason ended that in one meeting. "No one buys dignity here," he said. The room went quiet. This is not a branding opportunity. This is a responsibility. That was the weight of his power. Not noise, not showing off. A signature, a decision, a boundary no one crossed. The scholarships were announced in June. The first recipients were Marcus Hill, who volunteered at a veterans pantry, and Leah Watkins, who helped care for her younger brothers while keeping straight A grades. Dorothy handed them the certificates herself. "Your job is not to pay this back," she told them. "Your job is to pass it on." The auditorium rose. Not for money, for meaning. 1 year after the blizzard, snow fell again on Ashford Falls. Not as fierce, but bitter enough to empty the streets. Dorothy looked at the weather report, then at the kitchen lights. "Keep it open," she told Patrice. Patrice raised an eyebrow. "You expecting somebody?" Dorothy tied her apron. Somebody is always out there. At a little after 9, a knock came at the glass door. Soft. Then harder. Dorothy opened it. A young white woman stood outside shaking, hair stuck to her face, a toddler wrapped against her chest. Her car had died near the highway. Her phone was dead. She had seen the lights. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered. "I didn't know where else to go." Dorothy stepped aside. "Well, get in here before you freeze to death." Patrice covered her mouth. Mason, who had come by quietly with a donation of winter coats, stood at the back of the room and went still. The circle had closed. Dorothy took the child in her arms, wrapped him in a blanket, and set soup on the table. The young mother cried into both hands. Not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of someone finally safe. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Dorothy sat across from her. "Because somebody knocked on my door once too." Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the lights stayed on. And Dorothy Freeman, a woman the world had overlooked for most of her life, had become the reason an entire town remembered how to open its doors. So if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes kindness is weakness. Maybe they need to hear what Dorothy already knew. Sometimes the smallest open door becomes the beginning of justice.